finest, including our home country, which most of us are from, the United States of America. We're having issues with the trade war. We're having a lot of issues with the relationships between these two countries. So domestic consumption is a huge priority for the government here. What that means is that you're going to see malls built everywhere here in China to boost consumption. The result of that is that sometimes when you walk around in China, I haven't seen any ghost cities. I've seen a lot of ghost malls, especially during the work days where there's very few people shopping, a lot of people at work, a lot of people at school. This right here is the largest mall in downtown Ningbo. It's got European, American brands everywhere. You see Nike, you see Jordan, and of course, you gotta have an Apple store at a major wealthy city like this. This is probably one of two or maybe the only Apple store here. Even in a huge city like Zhejiang, there's only a couple Apple stores. Always in the best location. But you can see on a Saturday morning like this where you would think that there'll be a lot of people. For example, in North Carolina, in Chapel Hill, when we were at South Point Mall, there's usually a lot of folks Saturday morning at South Point Mall out in Durham, out in South Point in Chapel Hill. Here, you hardly see any people yet. On major holidays during the summer, NOLA, thank you. On major holidays during the summer vacations when all the kids are out of school, that's where thank you, thank you, NOLA. Thank you, guys. Let's continue to walk around and show you guys this commercial center. We actually got a lot more to show you. By the way, for all y'all who just joined the chat, who just joined the channel, aka first of all, please make sure you continue to follow the channel and share this live stream. Please share this live stream, everybody. Let's get to 400 shares. Gabby, thank you. For those of you who just joined this chat, those two pointy buildings right there, that is where we just were to begin our live stream. That is the largest Catholic church here in Ningbo. Gabby, thank you. That is the largest, I have to repeat that again, largest Catholic church here in Ningbo. Now, a lot of y'all might be surprised. There are Catholics here in China. Blissful, thank you. Not many, but there are Catholics in China. There's a lot of Muslims in China. There's a lot of Buddhists in China. There's a lot of Taoists. There are Christians and Catholics here in China, but not many. Now, the reason why this church makes sense that it's here, Alicia Fally, thank you. The reason why it makes sense that this large church is built here in Ningbo is very simple. Ningbo is a port city. Victoria Des, thank you. When so many Westerners initially made their incursion into China a few hundred years ago, 1700s, 1600s, they did it by sea. They did it by the ocean. Unlike Marco Polo. Marco Polo did it by land. Alicia PB, thank you so much, PB. They came by sea, so it makes sense that they are stopping at a coast. The coast of China on the east coast facing the ocean. This is one of their first landing points. Another little bit of history for everybody who's watching. The city of Ningbo that we're living in during the first Opium War, Alicia PB, thank you. When the British defeated the Qing Dynasty Navy and the unequal treaties were signed, Ningbo was one of the 5 or 6, I can't remember the exact number, Chinese coastal cities opened up to the British for trade. Blissful. Thank you so much. JK, thank you for sharing this live stream. Let's get to 400 shares, everybody. So I have to repeat that again. This city was opened up to the British. Gabby, Blissful, thank you. When the rest of the country was closed off in order for the British to facilitate trade. Unfortunately, what the British really wanted to trade was opium. Gabby, thank you. They really wanted to trade opium, because of the large trade deficit they had with China at the time. The reason why the Opium War broke out in the 1800s, right around 1840, was for a variety of reasons. The largest reason, in my opinion, was not about opium, was not about trade. It was about who calls the shots. This is something that Americans will understand, this terminology here. Who calls the shots? Because at that time, the Qing Dynasty was huge, controlling large parts of Asia, all of current-day China, all of current-day Mongolia. The British Empire by that time had already become the empire that the sun never sets. Huge empire. So it became about who exactly is the alpha on Earth at the time. That's, in my opinion, the real trigger of the Opium War. Now, the financial reason behind the Opium War was very simple. British were running a huge trade deficit with China. Why me, Gabby? Thank you. What is a huge trade deficit? Just like we have today with China back home in America, the British had a huge trade deficit. However, unlike the fact that the United States back home, we could just print the dollar, the Qing government only accepted one form of payment: silver. They only accepted silver. They didn't accept any paper money from England. They only wanted silver. Alicia, thank you. So the British, Eileen, thank you. Alicia, thank you. So the British were burning through silver in order to buy Chinese tea, Chinese pottery, all the things that they wanted from China, Chinese silk. They were burning through silver. So they said, we need to have a way where we can actually buy these things without burning through our silver. So they introduced opium, which is a drug, to China in order to balance out the trade. China didn't want to take the opium anymore, and that's why the war broke out, and it's called the Opium War. They didn't want the opium. British wanted them to keep buying it. They didn't want it. That's how the Opium War broke out. So this is a little bit of history. Now, the Ningbo port is caught in the middle of it because this is one of the ports that originally British wanted to have open so they could continue to trade tea, trade silk, trade ceramics, and of course trade opium. The Qing government refused. In the aftermath of the Opium War, this port was open to the British. So there are Western influences here in the city, including that church. So it's not a surprise that you're going to see this church right here in the city of Ningbo. Labs Rock, Gabby, thank you. Because of the early Western influence. Andrea, Labs Rock, thank you. I hope you guys are not bored by this history lesson. The Opium War is a seminal moment in Chinese history. Seminal moment in Chinese history, everybody. Bar Bishop, thank you. It is the moment in Chinese history where outside contact was forced on the Chinese. This is a very important concept you have to understand. The Chinese Qing government never went out and sought British incursions. The British showed up. And they came. Now, what's interesting about, now I have to talk about Japan a little bit because what's interesting about this is that Japan had a totally different experience, and this explains why the two countries' fates diverged later in the 20th century. A lot of us Americans back home, if you love history, you will hear an American name called Commodore Perry. He sailed his black ships. Literally, his ships were coated in black, and he sailed it into the port of Tokyo. I believe he sailed it into the Yokohama harbor. And that's how Japan was also forcefully opened up. Now, for a lot of folks who, as we walk into the store here, there's one thing I want you guys to understand as you're watching my show, and hopefully today it becomes educational. Sometimes being big, sometimes being big and wealthy isn't necessarily a good thing. Especially 200 years ago when we didn't have internet, when we didn't have, the type of communication that we do have now. The reason China and the United States, China and Japan had very different courses of history in the last 200 years is very simple. China is a big country. There was a lot of things that the British and the French wanted from this country. Does that make sense, everybody? There was minerals, there was coal, there was all types of wealth, there was gold, there was silk, there was tea. It's like a big pie on the ground, and the British wanted it and the French wanted it, right? Why didn't Japan get attacked the same way? Well, number one, when the Japanese saw the Americans sail into their harbor, they realized how far behind. Alicia, thank you. They realized how far behind they've fallen. You know what I'm saying? They realized how far they've fallen. You know what I'm saying? So they accepted American incursion into their land. They didn't put up a fight. And they needed to learn from the Americans. They said they needed to learn from the Americans, meaning they wanted to learn American technology and become stronger. China at the time was still mired in this belief that it was the alpha dog. Even though it didn't have any of the technology that the Americans or the British had, the Qing government still felt like they were the alpha dog. So they didn't feel a need to reform like the Japanese did, and they paid that price dearly 100 years later. So this is why a lot of folks who are watching back home in the United States, you guys have to understand the psyche of the Chinese Communist Party, because I think a lot of people don't understand the psyche. They only understand ideology. They only understand, that's all they understand is ideology. We're a democracy. We have Democrats and Republicans. They are communists. They must be very different. You got to look at the Chinese Communist psyche. Their psyche is very simple. We took over a country. We spilled blood to take over a country that was mired in poverty, backwardness, not open to the outside, being beat up by the British, being beat up by the Japanese, being beat up by the Russians. And we took over this country and we allowed the country to stand up. We let the country stand up and look at the world now, no longer kneeling, but standing up. So a lot of folks who are watching back home in America, you gotta understand the Chinese Communist Party's psyche, because the way they think about it, and I agree with them, is that they are the saviors of China. And if you look at the last 200 years of Chinese history, it's kind of hard not to agree with them. It's kind of hard not to agree with them, because when they took it over, the country was poor, backwards, closed off. You know what I'm saying? And so you got to look at their perspective. They're like, well, without us, this country would still be broke. This country would still be poor. This country would still be backwards. You know what I'm saying? Western countries would still be coming over to carve it up, just like the British did. So this is why I think a lot of Americans, when they're watching the news back home and they see all this negative, they must think to themselves, well, the Chinese people must be very unhappy. Chinese people must be very unhappy, right? Because they must be very, very unhappy. Multiply, thank you. But when you look at the reality of it, that's not true, because the approval ratings here, I can tell you this as an American that lives out here, the support rate, the approval ratings for the Chinese Communist Party here is huge, high. I would imagine over 90%. Think about that. Think about that, right? So now, of course, this is the result of being a single party state. But the other reason, very simply, is because they've done a lot to make this country modern, to make it beautiful. And of course, you think about this, man. You look at all these Western brands over here. You look at Swatch. You know what I'm saying? Hey, Scott just asked me a very existential question. What's better, man? I'm telling you this, man. There's no such thing as what's better. It's only what works. That's the question, man. That's the question we're all trying to find the answer to. You know, I'm asking myself, what works? What exactly works around here? Everybody got to find their own system that works. What works for China might not work for Africa. What works for Africa might not work for Europe. What works for America might not work for Asia. That type of stuff. All right, I'm getting sidetracked here because we're walking around this mall and it's just making me think about a lot of history, because Ningbo does have a lot of history. What it doesn't have is a vibrant nightlife, but that does have a ton of history. A ton of history. We don't talk about politics on the show, but we do talk a lot about history. History is why, you know why I love history? History is history is history. Multiple ways to interpret it, but events actually happened. Events actually happened. You know what I'm saying? If we don't learn from history, we're bound to repeat it. That's why, like, a lot of Americans back home, that's why I do these shows. You know, a lot of people, they're like, well, I'm gonna give you an example, because I read a lot, I learn a lot of things, and I share these things with you guys, man. If you really want to learn history, you really want to understand history, it'll explain a lot of the things that you see here in China today. What do I mean by that? Let me explain a little bit further. If you look, I'm going to give you guys a great example. And I promise you, nobody has ever uttered these words on the internet, but I'm going to tell it to you first. When you look at China today, there's a lot of things that's different about China. One of the first things you'll realize is that China has its own satellite system. So in the United States, we use something called GPS. In China, they use Beidou. Okay? Beidou system. They have their own GPS. Why? In case there is a conflict, they don't have to rely on an American-built or a European-built satellite system. They have their own system. So a lot of the things that we use in China today, Brittany B lived here 10 years ago. That didn't exist. There was only Apple Maps or Google Maps. When they use their own systems today, a lot of the 5G networks, a lot of the mapping systems and the delivery drivers use, the maps, they're now all using Beidou. They're all using Beidou. That's very, very different. Yet at the same time, this country is open enough where they'll say, you know what, we're going to have our most expensive shopping street here in the city lined by American brands. By American brands like this right here. So the funny thing about this country is, like, when you look at history, and I study history, when the first I'm gonna give y'all a little bit of history y'all ain't never heard of anywhere before. When the first Sino-Japanese War broke out between the Qing dynasty and the Japanese imperial government, the Japanese had already mapped out all of Manchuria. Let me tell you how absurd that is. Manchuria is the ancestral homeland of the ruling Qing dynasty people. These buffoons running the country at the time didn't even have their own ancestral homeland mapped out. invaders from Japan had mapped out all of Manchuria. So when the war broke out, those Qing dynasty idiots were running around not even knowing where to go. The Japanese already had advanced maps everywhere showing where to go, where to attack, where are the roads, where are the waters, where are the rivers. They had a complete map of where they needed to go. Same thing with the British. Study history. When Lord Macartney came to China in the 1800s, I said this before in one of my live streams, I think a lot of y'all didn't understand what I was saying. He left Beijing having completely failed his mission, which was to open up China peacefully to British trade and a British embassy. But you know what he did? You know what Lord Macartney did? He did not leave Beijing and go to the port of Tianjin and sail back home to England. What he did was he went all the way down to Canton, to Guangzhou. And along the way, and this is how ignorant the Qing dynasty government was. Along the way, this guy, Lord Macartney, and his entire mission, his entire team, they made maps, they made notes of all the military garrisons, they made maps of the river systems, they made maps of the roads, they made complete maps, and they took it back home to England so that 30, 40 years later when England invaded, they used those very same maps. So a lot of folks are like, well, you know, when you look at China today, a lot of folks are like, well, you know, China seems very closed off to the West, man. You know, they're always looking, you can't do satellite maps like the way that we could do on Google Maps. They don't allow satellite maps, you know. That's because they learned from history. That's because they learned from history. When you actually read these history books, a lot of these actions, a lot of these things that I see China, they make sense. They make sense because of the history that this country has suffered from, where they were not on guard. They were not careful. And look at what happened to them. Getting invaded. You know what I'm saying? Getting carved up. So a lot of the actions that I see today, and I think about it from the context of history, as someone who does read so much and read these academic scholarly works, I'm like, oh, that actually makes sense. Why doesn't Google Maps satellite work here? Oh, I get it now. Does that make sense? So I'm like, you look at these two churches over here, we're getting a little bit closer. We have one of our viewers, Brittany B. She used to live in this city, as I presume you're American, Brittany. She used to go to church here, Sunday Mass here. This is a Catholic church here in China, right next to the mall. Right next to the mall, y'all. Let's keep moving. I haven't even had a chance to look at all y'all's comments. I'm just out here just wilding, man, just talking about a bunch of stuff. Beautiful. I hope that makes sense to a lot of Americans who are watching back home. Is that what I encourage you guys, when you guys think about China as a country, is don't think about China from the context and the lens, and I know it's hard, from an American. Try to understand China from their perspective. Because everybody has a right to think about their system and what works for them. You know, Scott asked me a question. I'm going to repeat it here on this live stream. Scott asked me a question via text message. And thank you so much for the love today, Scott. Scott asked me, what's better, democracy or communism? Right? That's a question that may seem like very, it seems like a very naive question, yet it's a very good question. There's no right answer to that question. There's no right answer to that because the Chinese Communist Party will call themselves a democracy. The Chinese Communist Party defines itself as a socialism with Chinese characteristics. It defines itself as a democracy with Chinese characteristics. So this all comes down to, what's your definition of democracy? You know what I'm saying? Because the Chinese Communist Party would define their society as a democracy. Does democracy mean you have the right to vote? Or does it mean you have the freedom to do other things? I think every country has a right to set their own rules and set their own system. So a lot of Americans, y'all might listen to this, y'all might laugh. Y'all might be like, ha, 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 China is a democracy. Well, according to them, they do. According to them, they do. So, and it's one of those things where it's like, what is a democracy? Is it the freedom to say what you want? Is it the freedom to wear what you want? Is it the freedom to go where you want to go? These are tough questions. I don't have an answer to that. I don't have an answer to Scott's question. But what I will tell you this is that China has its own system and it seems to be working pretty well. Because if it's not working well, I think the people will let the government know about it. And it seems to be working very, very well here. And maybe we should just give them some space. And I say this as an American, maybe we should just give them some space and let them do their own thing. And all the while, man, let's just make some money, dog. At the end of the day, man, we all got to make some money around here, man. Look at this North Face making money out here. You know what I'm saying? Let's just make some money. Let's just do some business. At the end of the day, I'm not a politician. Politics matter, but I'm all about, trying to make a living, trying to survive out here in this world and do something positive. You know what I'm saying? Forget about the politics, man. Let's walk into North Face and see what the prices look like here. And with Brittany B, as you're watching this, I wonder if this place, now this place obviously existed when you were here 10 years ago. Nick, Jennifer, thank you. I'm sorry about the little rant that I just went on, man. But I love to tell you guys about what it is like to live here. And I will tell you this, though. For everybody who's watching, I have seen a lot of unhappy folks in China. I promise you this. I've seen a lot of unhappy folks in China. Absolutely, I have. You know what they're unhappy about? Like, this is a Clutch, thank you. You know what they're unhappy about? Keto Lee, thank you. I'm going to repeat this question. Do you know what they're unhappy about? They're unhappy about not having enough money. You know what I'm saying? I ain't never ran into a Chinese that came up to me and said, dog, man, I wish I could vote. God damn it, I need to vote, man. I need to vote. What can I go vote? It's always, man, I ain't making enough money. I ain't got enough money for my kids. I don't have enough to go on vacation. I need to make some more money. So all the unhappy folks that I ran into in China, at least in my opinion, that I've run into, they all want to make a little bit more money, make a better living. You know what I'm saying? I rarely see folks come up to here and just say things like, I need to go vote tomorrow. Boy, I feel a lot better if I went to go vote. Never heard that before. What I have heard is, man, my salary is way too low. You know what I'm saying? I can't afford to get this car that I want. I think the people here are very realistic, very, very realistic about what's important to them. You know what I'm saying? Let's keep moving, everybody. All right, we're here at an Adidas store. First time we're in an Adidas store. We've been to the Nike store, been to the Jordan store. We're just walking around. Let's compare some prices with back home, see if it's more expensive, less expensive. I don't know what this is, but this looks nice, though. This is nice, though. How much does this cost? Oh my God, this is 1,299 yuan. This right here is like $180, $175 for this pair of shoes. Let me put that right back. No discounts whatsoever, even though a lot of these shoes are made in China. They are, in some cases, even more expensive than back home. Super, super expensive. That was $185, man. Look at this right here. Look at this right here. How much is this? Man, this is $84 for this pair of Adidas. $84. Man, they're wilding with these prices. Look at this. How much is this? Man. How much is this shoe, Harry? Check it out. This shoe look kind of nice. That's something I would wear. How much is this? Oh, this is $699. So this is about, man. Look at this, $699. This is about $95, $96. No discounts whatsoever to be had here. Very, very expensive Adidas store. It's nice, though. Let's continue to walk around a little bit more. We're doing a morning city walk here in the city of Ningbo, city of 10 million folks out here. Once again, same consistent theme everywhere when you walk around China. The most prime real estate that you'll see everywhere in a large Chinese mall, especially if it's fancy, is going to be occupied by American and European brands. This is something that China has yet to solve, because a lot of these brands, like if we walk in the North Face, in order to become a fully international number one or 1A, 1B, the thing about Americans is that our brands are everywhere. Look at Pete's Coffee over here, another American or Canadian brand, whatever it is. Look at this right here. American brands over everywhere here in China. Tash O2, thank you. That's where the money is, exactly. So, I mean, if you look at North Face right here, look, the quintessential American brand. I used to live in Seattle, man. All the folks had this or Arc'teryx on. Let's walk in. I'm telling y'all, this is going to be expensive. This store is going to be expensive, y'all. Look at this right here. Wow, look at this. 这个价格多少? What's the price of this? Wow, look at this. How much is this? Look at the price right here. Oh my God. Look at this right here. 1998 yuan. So this is about $285 right here for this jacket right here. $285, 1998. Now, put it in context, everybody. The average per capita income here in the city of Ningbo is about $1,000, $1,200, $1,300 a month. Maybe a little bit higher. But what I saw was actually lower. For the folks that live in the city, about $1,300 to $1,400 a month for the city folks. That's US dollars. For the folks that live in the surrounding rural communities, $700, $800, $900 a month in average per capita monthly income. So you can see when you make $1,200, $1,300 a month and you coming in here to drop $300 on a jacket, this is not for everybody, right? This is not for everybody. Imagine if you live in rural Ningbo, in the outskirts of Ningbo, this is not something you will be buying. This is not something you will be buying. However, when you guys look at the rent prices that I showed you, $1,400 is a great salary here in this city, especially if you have a home to live in and you don't need to pay rent. You could live a very comfortable life out here. You could have a nice, decent car. You know what I'm saying? You don't even have to take the public transportation. You could drive everywhere. You could have a very nice life here on $1,400 a month. So what I want to tell you guys know is that when you guys hear this, you might say $1,000 a month, $1,400 a month. I can't even live on that. Well, that's because we're thinking about American prices. Think about what we just paid for our breakfast back there for $3.80 and how much we were able to get, how much food we were able to get. And then it makes sense. Now, what's interesting about all these American brands and all these European brands that are doing well here in China is they're counting on the continued growth. They are continuing. I agree with that, Scott. Scott just texted me again. I'm telling you guys, the growth of this country and all the consumerism is dependent on the middle class. So the middle class spending is crucial if North Face wants to do well here. Does that make sense? It is all about the middle class. So I'm telling you guys, man, the biggest question that is facing China as someone who lives here and who loves the country and who also loves America, but I love living here in China. Here's the most existential question facing this country. The most existential question facing this country is very simple. Very, very simple, y'all. Is China going to get caught in the middle income trap? That is a question we don't have an answer to. Is China going to get caught in the middle income trap? Because right now, China has become a middle income country. $10,000 a year in per capita income on average. That's where most countries get stuck in. Look at Argentina 30, 40 years ago. Look at a lot of these countries that are stuck in the middle income trap. Can this country break the curse of the middle income trap? That is the most existential question of this country. If it can, then oh my gosh. If it cannot, then you're going to continue to see the same type of salaries and wages that we see today. $1,200 a month, $1,000 a month, $1,500 a month. That's the type of question. So this is a question. We are living in a time where I'm witnessing this as we go. I'm 33 years old. That question is gonna get answered in my lifetime. That question will be answered in my lifetime. Will China break the middle income trap? Some people say yes. Some people say no. We're gonna find out in real time in these next few years, these next few decades. The answer is gonna become clear. Now, here's the other question that I have, because today I'm just in such a thoughtful mood this morning. I feel great. I had a great sleep. The question that I have, everybody, now this is an affordable store, Uniqlo right here. We're standing in some AC. Here's the other question that I have. I want all the Americans back home to think about this, okay? I want y'all to really think about this question. If China does become a high-income country, and then India also wants to become a middle-income country. India right now is a poor country, a dirt poor country. But India wants to become a middle-income country, okay? My question to all the American folks back home is, if India wants to become a middle-income country, where is that money gonna come from? Whose resources are going to be moved towards India in order to facilitate that happening? That's my question, right? Who's going to be paying the bill to make that happen? That's literally the question I have. You got 1.4 billion people living in India. They all want to eat. They all want to wear nice clothes. They all want to drive nice cars. They all want an iPhone. They all want a nice phone. Who's going to be paying for that? I'm actually very, very serious about that. Is that going to be a transfer of wealth from America yet again, or from China, or from Japan, or from Europe? I don't know. Who is going to make that happen? Anyway, I've been thinking about this. Because the way I think about it, is the world a zero-sum game? Or is it a pie that gets bigger? I don't know the answer. I would think that it's the latter. But I think about that all the time. I think about that all the time. This shirt right here is $8. $8.20 for this shirt. So we're